Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the third AMA. Today, we are joined by Chris Cameron, also known as Paper Imperium on the forums and in chat. And we are discussing the proposal Chris posted on the forum for the Maker Portfolio Core Unit. And I'll let Chris dive into that a little bit before we get into the questions. But as always, we encourage questions. So if you have any, please feel free to jump in. And Chris, I'll pass it off to you.
Absolutely. So the Maker Portfolio Core Unit is an attempt to solve several problems all at once. The main one of which is that there's no easy way to directly hold securities, such as bonds or even stocks or property directly. This portfolio, the Maker Portfolio Core Unit, is being proposed in order to administer create the legal entities, the legal framework needed for Maker to gain direct exposure to securities, but without an intermediary that is a borrower who has their own incentives and profit motives. So this is a fairly simple structure and is probably not appropriate for Maker to finance to a third party, but hopefully can be made into something that's very mechanical and allows Maker to not only invest on its own behalf, but also at the same time give Maker a way to start building real-world constituencies by reaching more into the real world. So part of the structure is that this would be the first problem is that Maker can't go out and buy a treasury bond or or something like that. The reason being, Maker is not a legal entity, and so it can't sign agreements, and it certainly can't pass know your customer regulations. So the problem is that right now we would have to do business with someone who already holds an asset that we want, but they would be in business for themselves, and there are not small costs to monitor transactions. So that it means that there's a minimum size of any given transaction. There's this tension between the size where it's profitable and then the size where it could be materially risky to the Maker protocol as a whole. So how do we get around this? So the key way for Maker to invest in its own behalf is to create a charitable trust in the United States, probably domiciled in the state of North Dakota. They have very robust charitable trust laws. But there are some other alternatives should we need to explore others. But the structure is fairly simple. The idea is to create a charitable trust, a particular species of charitable trust called a NIMCRUT, a net income with makeup charitable remainder unit trust, NIMCRUT for short, NIMCRUT. So the key features of this are that, one, it is a legal entity, so it can hold property such as a treasury note or a bond for Apple or Johnson & Johnson or whatever the asset is. It can actually hold it. That means that it can engage in business with financial custodians like Vanguard, Fidelity, or other brokerages. The second key feature is that it is a tax-exempt entity. So one of the issues that is a bit of a gray area in U.S. tax law is how to treat crypto. Crypto is currently classified as property. So what happens when a borrower or a trust permissionlessly uses a Maker vault? Well, they are rubbing their hands together and generating DAI, which they have a cost basis of zero because they paid $0 for it. They sell it on the open market for $1. Well, the tax bill on those realized gains of $1 for every DAI would swamp the investment return. So you need a tax-exempt entity to make sure that you're not reliant upon merely the characterization of that as lending. So you're protected from a tax bite either way. Now, a NIMCRUT is a vehicle that's typically used by wealthy individuals in the U.S. That want to donate an asset, perhaps a highly appreciated asset that they don't want to sell and realize gains on, but still want income from that highly realized dollar value of that asset. So typically, a wealthy individual maybe they have stock that appreciated 5 or 6 times over. They put it into the trust sells it, buys some income generating asset, and the wealthy individual gets the income. And at the end of the life of the trust, the asset goes to the charity. That's why it's tax exempt, because any remaining assets at the end of the trust's life are donated to a charity. Now, in Maker's case, we can't really be a beneficiary of that income stream. So the next step was to figure out how can the trust actually pay Maker a stability fee? And the answer is through our normal vaults, right? Because Maker cannot be named as a beneficiary. In this case, the trust would have some small amount of profits that would be orphaned inside of it. So those will also be donated to charity under this the envisioned model, though that is not strictly necessary from a legal standpoint. It's just why distribute it to some taxable entity that's not us? So might as well spread the wealth, right? So in this case, the charity would get some amount of interest rate spread. Perhaps we invest, these are just making up hypothetical numbers, and have the trust buy $100 million of 10-year treasury bills, which pay, let's say, 1.5%. So Maker could finance the trust's purchase at, say, 1.1%. The trust then has 0.4% off of the investment that it can use to both pay for the trustee's expenses and its operational expenses, and then any remainder is distributed to the charity that we name. Now, part of the other appeal of this setup is that a trust is easy to tightly bind to our will. So it gives us, in effect, Maker gets the ability to create a customer that it sets the rules for. And these are envisioned to be very transactional. So one purchase of securities would be one trust. And if the next month we want to buy more treasuries or more bonds or more whatever, we create a new trust so that each one is siloed from the other. It also makes it easy and unambiguous what kind of operations the trustee is authorized to do. In this case, one set of borrowing from Maker, one set of maturity, or one set of purchases, and then hold those securities to maturity and just split up the interest payments as dictated by the terms. And so writing checks would be and filing a tax return. So even though these are tax exempt, they do still need to file a tax return. This is not an onerous expense. Most trustee companies will do so for around $1,200, so it's not too much. As far as cost structure for these go, the actual trustee, you're typically looking at least a $7,500 flat fee. And then once you get above $1 million, you're getting into typically 10 basis points or less. So it gets quite reasonable. We would also need to draft the legal documents, though that should not be super expensive after the first one because we'll have a template we can work from. Though perhaps in the future we will wish to innovate further to provide more flexibility. So let's get into the limitations. So the limitations are that these trusts can only have a maximum lifespan of 20 years. So there will be no purchasing 30-year treasuries or other extremely long-dated assets unless we were willing to bear the interest rate risk of having to liquidate it before maturity. That's possible, but not what I would advise. The next limitation is that this is a fairly rigid structure. It's meant to be simple, to be transparent, so it does not require oracles. It does not require intensive monitoring to make sure that the borrower is complying with covenants, because it's very simple. They just hold the securities for the next X number of years. But that also means it's probably not appropriate for financing, for a trust to then finance other projects that we typically are already exploring through the real world finance unit. So this is a very, very different purview. So this is on our own behalf as opposed to customers coming to us. It's just a different animal. It requires more monitoring and more legally intensive structure to protect makers' rights. Now, some of the other benefits of this, it does grind out a little profit for us. Treasuries are not exactly going to drive the bus on makers' profits, but it also, part of the impetus of this core unit is to find a way for Maker to reach into the real world more and begin establishing relationships with real world people. Maker needs to have constituencies that are willing to advocate for it and defend it in the face of coming regulation. Maker's getting large and it attract attention. The very fact that we were able to get the Fed to come speak with us earlier this week shows that we are on the radar of the centralized financial power that are in the world. Some of them would probably be happy to work with us, but we should never leave ourselves open to politically motivated appointees or politicians using regulation as a bludgeon against us. So if we are financing government and distributing much of that gain to real world charities that we can choose, and we can choose a different one for every trust and spread the wealth far and wide, regular financing of real world needs that people can point to, not speculative real estate, not projects that may have political opponents, either local or federal level. Even something as simple as solar power can draw criticism from certain parties. We want to be able to reach a broad base of support. And this is a way for us to do it, and do it in a way that does not cause Maker to assume large amounts of risk or spend large amounts of money. The structure is meant fresh DAI, not use the peg stability module USDC, though that's a possibility, but that's beyond the purview of this proposed unit. This proposed unit is part provide ballast and higher quality, an ocean of high quality collateral to Maker's balance sheet. It's part to provide us with social outreach to help us meet our mission of financing underserved communities, and partly to provide some level of lobbying power for Maker. When you are loaning money to the government's more likely to listen to you. And that's it in a nutshell. I'll take questions.
Fantastic introduction. Do you have a question? You want to go for it?
You go ahead. You start it.
Okay. One of the things I'm particularly interested in is the risk side of all of this. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, what is the differences between the way we currently assess the risks of potential collateral types and how we would need to look into the risk of these types of investments?
Yes. So I've spoken to the head of risk because I feel to ask if they would be willing to provide their standard risk assessments for any collateral that was recommended by this core unit. I should stress that this core unit would handle no money beyond its operating expenses and the legal expenses to set up each trust. So no millions or even billions would be flowing through this core unit. It would actually be one of the cheaper core units on its own budget. As far as risk, the idea is to target only extremely safe, high quality securities. Treasuries are the obvious starting point if those go well, and if the DAO has a desire for either higher amounts of regularly scheduled income that is uncorrelated from the feast and famine of crypto cycles. We can explore higher yielding instruments, but I would stress that we want to hold things that really have close to no chance of default. And we are already tied at the hip to the US dollar, so treasuries make a logical starting point. This is supposed to be phase one of a crawl, walk, run. We can iterate upon the process afterwards, but we want something simple, something that minimizes the risks and is hard to go wrong. So at the moment, to control the peg, the PSM, which is a wonderful real-time tool for fine-tuning where DAI's dollar peg stands, has accumulated more than $3 billion in USDC at the moment. If we could make that $1 billion, but with $2 billion in treasuries, that seems like it removes risk, because those USDC are ultimately backed by fiat anyway. So why not remove the intermediary that stands between us and the fiat and replace it with a captive entity that we set the rules for, and we have no exposure to the danger of their interests diverging from our own.
I understand why treasuries are a relatively safe investment, but when you talk about avoiding securities that are politically contentious, when you look outside of like U.S. treasuries, how do you think? What's a strategy for? It seems like investments are kind of inherently political to a certain degree. So how do you think about avoiding that like political conflict in the securities? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the universe of investable assets is probably fairly small in terms of number of assets, simply because of the high degree of safety that we want to have. Unless we decide we want more risk, I don't advise it. I think we have other levers we can pull for higher return. This is meant to be positive return, but one of the main functions is to have Maker interacting with the real world in ways that are regular financing businesses and governments and charities that people are familiar with, that they can see the impact. So as far as specific investments beyond treasuries, I suspect we would next look at federal agency debt and AAA or near AAA grade bonds. Those would be things like Apple and Johnson & Johnson. There's really not many to choose from, but the good news is that the depth of these markets is vast. So should we choose to do so as either a means of increasing income, increasing charitable contributions, relieving pressure on the PSM, we have deep markets that we can pretty much take as much as we want. I've set the aspirational goal for this unit to help Maker onboard 5% of the treasury market within 5 years. That is an aggressive goal. It amounts to about a run rate of $30 billion a month in treasury purchases. To put that in perspective, the Federal Reserve currently is propping up treasuries to the tune of $80 billion a month. So we'd be doing about 40% of what the Federal Reserve does. Now, should we decide that Maker wants to try to play the decentralized central bank game, then obviously this is a tool we can use. That's not what I would advocate, but it means that we can grow our balance sheet with such high quality collateral that any individual project becomes less risky to Maker overall. And it also gives us established, regularly scheduled income. Our expenses, our fixed expenses for employees and other operating expenses is only growing. And we've already seen a swing in our profits of our revenues from $6 a second to $2 in the last 2 months. crypto is volatile, and this can be a way to smooth out some of that volatility. And it will also mean that real world finance is able to, perhaps with a more free hand, deal with individual business borrowers that are coming to us. If there's on one end of the portfolio extremely safe assets, then on the other, we can perhaps move more quickly with more risky assets.
Can I say something? Yeah, because this maneuver, it involves printing DAI first and then buying treasury bills.
So that's the way I envision it. Yeah. It's not if that becomes a sticking point, I suspect there are at least for treasuries, I suspect there are ways that we can arrange for the trust to get short-term financing, for the week or whatever it takes to purchase the treasuries, then mint the DAI against the treasuries already held by the trust. That would, of course, provide a little more drag in the cost structure. Whether that would be prohibitive, I don't think so, given the short-term nature of that type of loan. I don't know if that would work for other things, but for treasuries, I have a strong suspicion we can figure that out.
Maybe. Okay, but a version of this idea was already aired like a year ago, and that it was slightly riskier. It involved, we had low liquidity at the time, or total value locked. So it was proposed that we mint DAI and we buy ETH. And we put that ETH in a vault, and voila, it's the same thing as if a normal vault. But the problem, is of course if the value of ETH drops, and we have to, that's impossible because we have now minted something that is less worth than what the amount of DAI that we minted.
Yes, so that's a great observation.
That proposal did not go through.
Mm-hmm.
However, with treasury bills, are T-bills ever underwater?
So if you are holding to maturity, then strictly speaking, no. And if they are ever underwater, then everything else you've run into problems everywhere. The only way, so if you're going to hold, that's part of why these are designed to hold to maturity. That way we are not exposed to interest rate risk, because obviously if rates go up, then the market price, there would be a discount to the face value of the treasury bill or treasury note or whatever in the secondary market. Given that this would be freshly minted DAI that would not have existed without the investment to begin with, any positive nominal yield should be profitable. Now, this will not provide a way to drive high profits.
It will.
Yeah, but it is designed to be profitable.
The volumes are fantastic.
Yes.
you can have it, but it's it is also a yield-bearing asset, unlike ETH. So if we're holding to maturity, we're insulated against price fluctuations. In fact, even the trust would not need to account for it at a mark-to-market rate, I don't believe. If it's in a hold-to-maturity portfolio, and you declare that up front for accounting rules. But the main thing is that because we're not sourcing DAI from elsewhere, unlike a traditional fractional reserve financial entity that is having to borrow short to lend long, we're not in that position. In fact, it makes Maker ideal to become part of the beating heart of the world financial system. There is no market deeper than U.S. Treasuries, and for us to be able to be involved in it,
as a way to finance charitable giving and to steady our own balance sheet at the same time. It should also steady world markets. And by being able to have a steady hand that is able to buy a near buyer of last resort that is not the government central bank, because we can buy at profitably at negative real interest rates, unlike J.P. Morgan or Credit Suisse.
Yeah. But as far as I see it here, you have two innovations, not one. I'm reading up on the Nimkrut. I never heard about the word Nimkrut before today. And just having a Nimkrut as a collateral type would be an innovation.
So yes, the idea is that the Nimkrut is able to pass know your customer anti-money laundering hurdles because and sign contracts and pursue its own legal rights. Should some other core unit decide to park more risky assets that might require legal recourse, this maybe is a starting point for them to work from and build out to suit their own needs. So the idea is that these will be designed to be very mechanical. Like I said, for this core unit, that would be very transactional. But it gives us a way to provide a know your customer legal entity that we control what they can and cannot do, and do it in a way because these have a very narrow purpose that's easy for us. It may or may not be suitable for other uses. And then the Nimkrut owns the asset we want and we loan to them. So it's almost the inverse of an asset originator who has an asset they want to borrow against. And they create an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, and that goes and looks for financing. We have the financing, and we're looking for a trustworthy partner that we can have a long-term business, low maintenance business relationship with, that we can trust. Because we can't pursue our own legal remedy.
The Nimkrut makes sense even without the T-bills involved or the treasury bills. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you could actually start at the Nimkrut level and just to test the waters. And when it's clean, you can up the pot a bit with the treasury bill. If you propose it with the treasury bills right away, it might be difficult to mentally digest.
Yeah. So the part of the reason of choosing treasuries is because it's the safest collateral that I could imagine, and it also the risks associated with holding them are ones we already hold through being pegged to the U.S. dollar. If the United States Treasury defaults, then DAI is not going to do well anyway.
Okay, but the upper limit to this, could we limit ourselves to say that we limit ourselves to the size of the USDC in the PSM?
Absolutely. So I would imagine doing a test run of this with 3-4 million being the number. Because we want to have it be a number that's high enough that covers the fixed costs of paying because the Nimkrut will pay the corporate trustee who doesn't have much to do except write checks and file the tax return. But there are some fixed costs involved, so it does have to clear probably $10,000 a year in profits, whatever we leave. So there will be a small proof of principle. I mean, we could, if we're willing to take a loss on it, we can set one up for $10,000. And try it out, which maybe that's appropriate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then I would imagine success if more trusts, new trust made each time we want to make a purchase.
Side note, I think we have to, if this ever passes, I think we have to limit ourselves to T-bills or treasury bonds. Yeah. I used to work for a AAA rated or two AAA rated companies. And when they both lost their ratings. The first was ABB and the second was GE. And they had just, a couple of year passes. One had a disastrous acquisition and the other one was practically fraudulent. So, lending to private companies.
I agree. I think we're on the same page there. That is merely an option should the DAO decide to get extra income. I personally would rather see this as a way to finance makers' building of social and government partners in the real world, while also providing a floor of revenue each year for us.
Yeah, the PR effect would be fantastic.
Maker, lender to governments.
Yeah.
To that point, the investments that you've talked about focusing on makes sense from an investment standpoint, but thinking about that, garnering goodwill with different types of regulators, does it make sense to apply the same strategy of investing in treasuries in other countries, or no? Or
possibly. So one criteria is it would have to be dollar denominated debt. Not every country issues dollar denominated debt, particularly that's under the legal jurisdiction of somewhere with a good framework, like usually the UK or the US are typically two of the largest, most popular sets of laws to issue debt under. It would have to be dollar denominated to insulate us from exchange rate risk. I would, because the exchange rate risk fluctuations over many years could swamp any investment return. So it would have to be dollar denominated debt. It would also have to be a government that we really felt strongly was going to be a high quality borrower. We're kind of in bed with Treasury anyway, so it makes sense there. We would have to do. It's harder to do due diligence on governments. I'm confident there are governments that we would be happy to lend to at a positive nominal rate that are outside the U.S. But we would have to take extra steps to review this, and we would do that with this core unit. But I feel very strongly that a third party that is not the one proposing given collateral do a risk assessment, which is why I reached out to Risk because there has to be an objective person, not just an objective third party assessment from within the DAO as well. We can't be doing our own risk assessments for things that we're proposing. It's just opens us up to the same person missing the same mistake twice, or missing the same error twice. But I guess to get back to your original question, I don't think we should invest in government debt purely for political gain. We have to protect the protocol from loss.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Risk management at the top.
Mm-hmm. But if Canada or Singapore, wants to offer some dollar-denominated bonds, I could see us dipping our toes into that once we're comfortable with the structure.
Okay, that makes sense. Has Risk had anything to say about how implementing this core unit might change the way we think about risk in MakerDAO?
We've not had that kind of in-depth discussion, mostly just to confirm that they would be willing to do the typical collateral onboarding risk assessments like they already do now for crypto collaterals.
Okay, cool.
And I believe I believe they have some folks that have some expertise in fixed income, but I'm not 100% sure.
So I kind of want to get into the process of this a little bit. Mm-hmm. So in terms of how you would essentially use these securities as collateral, are you creating a token specifically? I believe that was mentioned in the proposal.
Yeah, so there's multiple ways we could probably go about this. And so it is flexible. The way we currently do real world assets is probably a good starting point where a custom token is created to plop into the vault on behalf of the borrower. In this case, the borrower is someone that we created and we very narrowly empowered to perform certain actions. So it should be fairly straightforward. The whole point is to create a borrower, create a customer that has to do things the way we want them to, and without a profit incentive to squeeze us once they have the money. It's not to say that you should never we should never lend to profit-seeking borrowers, but this just removes a layer of risk. So the idea is that make a vault similar to what we already do for real-world assets with a placeholder token, and then the DAI debt is attached to that vault, and the trust is able to withdraw DAI from the vault.
Okay, and you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier as well, but as far as what happens, is there an idea of what would happen if we needed to liquidate a vault for some reason, or if, for example, an emergency shutdown happened? Like what?
Yeah. So we're still working through the details. So I don't want to give a specific answer because it would not be as thoughtful as it needs to be. However, this is a smaller hurdle to overcome, I think. Treasuries in particular, the stream of payments should be uninterrupted by anything that happens inside the crypto universe. Also, unlike privately issued securities like we currently deal with, treasuries do not require any accredited investor status to own. So I suspect we could find or build a keeper ecosystem for this, particularly if we're making monthly purchases and perhaps as a way to shrink DAI supply we want to liquidate as well. So I don't have a detailed answer yet, but I think that it is probably not the hardest thing for us to solve.
Makes
because
sense.
the money should be there and anyone can take it. Anyone can bid on it.
Some of the things, I guess, treasury bills would generally be a fixed maturity. If you were to invest in other types of securities, do you think there's like a percentage level for risk, for keeping risk low, that would make sense in terms of how you would diversify those investments?
So that would have to be looked at on a case-by-case basis because no matter how big we get, we're still price takers in the market for yield. So higher yield gives you a little bit more safety. So that's a question that would have to be for later. This is, as I say, at the crawl stage of the crawl, run, walk. I don't want us to get fancy or get out over our skis. This is meant to be a very conservative, the most conservative collateral on Maker's balance sheet.
What if the US goes the way of Europe and interest rates are starting to turn negative? We would have to stop it.
So great question. So for the things we had already purchased, that would have no effect on the payment schedule because we purchased and we're holding to maturity. That said, if we purchased and rates went down, that would increase the price of the treasuries we held or that the trust held as collateral and could be sold for a realized profit. Obviously, we would then on an ongoing basis have to find some other way to get yield or just wait out the negative rates and close up shop. There's not much we can do if the U.S. was at negative nominal interest rates.
Okay, that was I have another one, and possibly this will be received very well with the regulatory authorities, and possibly this will make them go mental. Because what we're doing here is making a second bank with the authority to print US dollar.
So not quite. I guess so. In some ways, it's semantics, but
most dollars in circulation are not created by the Federal Reserve. If you have a bank account at Wells Fargo and I have a bank account at Citigroup, and you pay me for, maybe I helped build the addition to your house and you paid me for it. Citibank does not receive dollars; it receives an IOU for dollars from Wells Fargo, which would be your bank. DAI is really no different, except for the fact that we are not under the purview, directly under the purview of the Federal Reserve at the moment. But it's really no different. Receivable. It's an IOU with a face value of $1 and yields 0. As long as the market is willing to pay that, then I think that I don't think there's anyone who can cry foul. Also, once we begin to hold government debt, if someone really wanted to come after us and like shut us down completely, then you're also going to cause a potential credit event, because and if there's anyone that's incentivized to show that they will never default on the debt, it's the U.S. Treasury. The last time there was a delay in payments, I believe, was in the early 70s, and it caused quite a stir. And they bend over backwards to pay creditors first. So if you come after us and we hold, really any significant amount of Treasury debt, then what happens to that debt, right?
This is the juiciest proposal I've heard in a long time. I hope Risk is okay with it, and I hope we start slowly. But this could generate so much cash for Maker. It's just unbelievable. But okay.
I think our real limitation is going to be the peg. From just a technical standpoint. The other day, 180 million DAI were minted, and half of that was actually the PSM trying to devalue DAI. So on a macro level, this could help ease the burden on the PSM. And we always have the PSM that can work in reverse. I agree. We will. This is something we'll dip our toes in, make sure the temperature's right. Maybe wait out a little. Yeah, this is a long run, ongoing strategy. This is not a let's go and buy $100 billion in Treasury notes. This is let's do 5 million a month, and then 10 million, and then 15, and small numbers.
But it's just like the demand is unending. So I guess okay. Let's try this. See where it ends.
Yo, I got another question. Going back to what Jerry was asking about the token, are you going to be managing custody of these tokens, or will somebody be informed about how to do that?
So the idea is that this would be managed in the same manner that current real world asset vaults are. So in theory, they're permissionless, but we could either whitelist only the address of the trust, or only use a token that they have access to. It should be a one-time transaction, except for repayment, periodic repayments. Treasuries pay on a semi-annual schedule, so every 6 months the trust should be depositing DAI back in. But this core unit, the MPCU, Maker Portfolio Core Unit, would not be handling or custodying any assets or funds beyond what it takes to pay the legal fees and perhaps put a couple $1,000s into a trust to form it. The idea is that this core unit exists for the purpose of signing the documents to be the grantor to start one of these trusts, pay the lawyer to draft the documents, pay another lawyer to double check it, and just facilitate the perhaps report back to the DAO as well. So periodically look into the trust account, make sure the security's still there, but it should be fairly fire and forget.
and this core unit should not have its hands on the trusts once they're created.
Okay, so that was kind of my next question. In terms of that part of the process, like you proposed yourself as the facilitator and no planned hires at this point, but as you start to scale, do you foresee that there will be enough going on that you'll need to hire people, or do you think that these are so set and forget that you can just kind of manage it?
So from a perspective of signing documents and just looking into each trust to make sure that it's still holding what it should and that it filed its taxes, and just that the trustee is still doing their job, which they shouldn't have to do much. Other than that, I don't foresee a whole lot of labor unless we chose to use this core unit to scale into other assets, in which case then we would probably need to onboard some folks for in-house research. But things like legal and legal documents, obviously the trustee themselves would not be us. Most things would be outsourced to professionals who practice those skills full time. This core unit is mostly in order to pay the bills for the lawyers and legal filings and sign the documents. There's really it's really should not be very labor intensive. It's not supposed to be like monitoring a loan that's a revolver for a borrower. I mean, we can bring in extra headcount if that makes the DAO comfortable, but there's it might be make work, but we could split it into 2 part-time jobs if that was a requirement.
Makes sense. Well, I believe I have made it through my questions. Do you guys have any other questions? Anybody else?
I'm good to wrap.
Yeah, I just I guess we can all do our research and find out if the U.S. Treasury bills are ever sold for, structurally for less than what they're worth. That's the only sticking point I can think of.
So if interest rates go up, then
no. Like if there's some period where you buy Treasury bills and they're always supposed to go up because they pay interest. Yeah.
Oh, you mean the net present value? So yeah. So say we pay $1 for something that's supposed to pay us 2%, right? So the net. So now, if interest rates rise to elsewhere in the economy or on future issues of treasuries rise to say 5%, well, no one's going to pay us $1 for something that only pays out 2 cents a year because they expect a nickel, right? So in that case, on the secondary market, the mark-to-market price, it would be sold at a discount to the face value. We would have to sell it for less than $1. Now, we will get around that because if we hold to maturity, we are not subject to that risk, to that market risk, which is also why we can't do extremely long-dated maturity, because the legal limitation on the life of this trust is only 20 years.
All right, yeah. But 20 years is good. So what the time period are you planning here?
So we probably want to look at the middle part of the curve, barring any major shifts in current interest rates. So probably starting at the 7 year and 10 years, probably we would look at that would provide enough yield to make this worth doing without huge amounts, and also still spin off enough cash for the to be distributed to a charity after the trust paid its expenses.
Yeah. One small comment on the charity thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that stuff is surprisingly problematic. Yeah. So I've been with Maker for a few years, and you have no idea about the discussion that stuff caused last time it was a thing. You have no idea how people are going to start quarreling once there's just free money to be distributed. There are seals in Antarctica. There are penguins in Sahara. There's just no stop. So seriously, I think that you need some kind of automation, some kind of distribute anything system. Why? Is because the amounts that that's going to be distributed are so high that even large charities could get digestion problems. Seriously. Yeah. So it sounds like a trivial matter. It's not. And it's politically dynamite, even in the community.
So that's a fair point. Because the idea is to ease into it. And my hope is that these are going to be monthly purchases. Then we can assign a new charitable beneficiary to each trust each month. So hopefully, it's a first world problem though, right? We're just sending the free money.
But I have a vague suggestion. Just possibly think about it. Is that you never name the charity that's going to benefit.
So we will be required to. It's a legal requirement, unfortunately.
Yeah, you black box it. And then there is another CU or something anywhere that is just picking charities, and they're not telling the community about it. The charities are coded. So charity 1165, that is Amnesty International or something. And then you just lottery the thing. There's like an industrial scale strength solution, but the minute the money will get distributed to charities, an enormous amount of time will get lost, people discussing whatever.
I am personally agnostic to which charities receive money, so I am open to any and all suggestions like that on how to help the DAO quickly and without conflict assign charitable beneficiaries.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, though. I see what you mean about that being a potential point of contention. And it could go in so many different directions as well. I mean, the obvious thing is for people to argue about which charities it goes to, but people will also argue about whether or not. I remember one of the other big issues in the last time there was a discussion about that was just whether or not charities are willing to accept DAI, how that affects them tax-wise, what we can do to help other charities.
Well, in this case, they would receive US dollars from the trust.
Okay, well, I guess that takes some of the pain out of it. But I mean, I would honestly, the advice I would give would kind of be in the opposite direction of just putting whatever charity it's going to. I don't have strong feelings about. I don't know that much about charities, so I don't have strong feelings about them. I don't know which is the best charity to give your money to. But I do think putting it back on the community and finding a way to put it back on the community and let them decide, and so that you can constantly point at it and say hey, we put these options up. The community had the chance to say which charities they wanted it to go to. Constantly being able to point to it and say the community is deciding this. I don't know. I think that's one way to avoid it. We're probably going to disagree on that, but if you can't, I don't know. That's sort of how we're thinking about the mascot. With the mascot thing, we've had a few people raise some potential issues around that too. And at this point, we've have avoided saying the mascot's not official. There's no official mascot of MakerDAO. If the community adopts it and likes it, cool. But we're kind of just pointing back, continually pointing back at it and being like, well, people have been voting for it. They like it. They're talking about it. This is where the consensus seems to be for now. So if it shifts the other way, fine, we'll drop it and move on to something more productive. But, that's my 2 cents. And, handle it however you want to.
Well, I think that'll bring us to the end then.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Chris, for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Excited to see how this goes moving forward. And I guess we'll see everyone in the forums.